This is The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. Over our 12-episode season, I will share some of my best sweater knitting techniques with you while we knit a sweater together. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. Today, we are going to be talking about splitting the yoke into the body and the two sleeves and adding stitches that connect those two for the underarm. So we're going to make this sort of little pinch here and here with extra stitches. And because of all the technical difficulties we've had and the work they've been doing on the outside of my building, I'm pointing there because that's where the window is. And right outside there, they've been scraping and pounding and spackling and whatnot away. So finding time to record has been a challenge, but that means that unfortunately I finished my sweater already. This was the sweater that I was going to display everything to you while you're knitting this one so that I could work on another design. This will be called The Heart Wants. There's some more stuff that needs to happen before I send it to my tech editor, but it's all knit up. So unfortunately, that means I had to figure out something else to demonstrate what exactly is going on. So this morning I made a tiny bitty baby sample. I wanted to be able to show you, this is the yoke. It's very tiny. It's about 1/10 of the size, the number of stitches required. But that was sort of the easiest thing for me to do. So it said cast on 200, I cast on 20, and we've gone from there. And I now am at the point where I'm ready to split off the sleeves from the body. And I'm working on DPNs, but you generally are working on a long circular needle. So I've already done started the new round, which will be the split round. And so I've done the first half of the back. Remember that we have our marker in the center back, and so we've got the two halves of the back and then the two sleeves and then the whole front. So this is the two halves of the back. This is the first sleeve, which I've slipped to waste yarn already, the front, and then the other sleeve is still on a DPN. So the waste yarn I've used, I'm going to also use for the provisional cast on of the underarm. If you're good at crochet, if that whole crocheted provisional cast on thing works for you, you can go ahead and crochet a few more stitches than are called for your underarm. Crochet that with some waste yarn, and then you can go into, when you get to the point of the split, start knitting into the bumps on the back of the chain. I think I have that right. And then you want to pick up one bump for each stitch that you need to cast on provisionally, and then you'll have that little chain across there until you get to the end of the number of stitches you need to provisionally cast on, and then you proceed with the front of the body. Since I am hopeless at crochet, I haven't ever had the time to really pause all the knitting I want to be doing to really practice crochet enough to feel comfortable. And since I didn't discover, people already knew about it. I learned about the provisional Longtail cast on, and I decided that it was just so great that I would just keep using that. It works for me, it makes sense to me, so that's what I use. But if it doesn't make sense to you, look for a provisional cast on that works for you. Okay, there is no one right way to do any of this, and I'm going to talk about that more in the next episode when I talk about direction. But today we are splitting so that we can get on with the business of just a bunch of straight stockinette knitting of the body and the sleeves. So for this version, the two-tail long-tail provisional cast on in the middle of a round, that's what we're doing. It would be the middle of a row as well, but in the middle of the work, not at the beginning of the work or before the stitches that exist on the work or at the end of a round or row. We're smack in the middle for this sleeve. I am using the rest of the tail of the provisional yarn that's holding the sleeves, and I find this makes it a little easier to wrangle these two threads. And I'm going to put the yarns, oh my goodness, they're starting already. I'm hoping that you can hear me because I'm wearing my mic today over the grinding. So I have my waste yarn around my thumb and my working yarn around my forefinger. And as with a regular longtail cast on, I'm going to grab with my working needle the outer strand of the waste yarn of the thumb yarn, and then go and pull the inner strand of the working yarn through. That ends up with the working yarn over the top of the needle and the waste yarn along the bottom, and that is how you need it to be for the two-tailed longtail provisional cast on. Okay, so we do the waste yarn from the thumb and then the working yarn from the finger and pull it through, and that's 2. And I'm going to do a couple more just as I talk you through it, since with everything that's going on, I'm not going to try and show it to you up close, unfortunately, but I'm going to talk you through it so that those listening on the iTunes version can also work along. So you've got your slingshot style yarns. You're holding the 2 strands. The thumb yarn is the waste yarn, and that will go underneath the needle eventually. And the forefinger yarn, or the pointer yarn, is the working yarn. So you grab the outer thumb yarn, which is the waste yarn, and you pick that up from outside of it and get it on your needle. And then you swing around and grab the working yarn, the inner strand of the working yarn, and you pull that loop through the thumb yarn loop. Tighten it up. Be sure to tighten these stitches up. Get them close to the needle. You don't need to make the stitches really tight after the first 1 or 2, but you want to make sure that they are close, that they're not big and sloppy, because you just don't want sloppy underarms. So I'm going to do a 4th one, and it's just very straightforward. If you know how to do the longtail cast on, you want to make sure that your working yarn is the loop over the needle, so that when you come to the next yarn, you'll be able to knit them. And then at the end, we will go and we will pull out that provisional yarn, pick up those stitches so that we can do the sleeve without any fuss. Okay, so now I've got those stitches all set, and it's time to continue on with the front body. And you just knit normally. Make sure that first stitch that you knit of the body is snug, so that you get that stitch close to your provisionally cast on stitches for the underarm. You want to make sure there aren't any gaps. And then you just work your way across the front, and we'll do the same thing again with the second sleeve. But I'm going to tell you to just go back and watch me again, because because the work on the building is loud, and I'm worried that you aren't going to be able to hear me or see me. So that is basically how we do it. We are going to do the second sleeve now and provisionally cast on those underarm stitches. There are, as I told you, you can do the crochet cast on if you need to. A lot of other top-down knitting patterns have you just bind off those stitches along the body, and then you go and pick them up again. I don't even know. I just like this. This is totally seamless. It is completely, wonderfully seamless, and you don't even have to do the Kitchener stitch. Now, I happen to not mind the Kitchener stitch, so, but here, oh, it's getting a little felty. I've been wearing this sweater a lot, but now it's getting warm. But you can see this is where those stitches were provisionally cast on, and there's no seam, there's no nothing. So I really do like doing that little bit of fiddly work in the middle of this. Will make the finishing of this project so much quicker and easier. So you're going to provisionally cast on, you're going to have your sleeves out on waste yarn, and you just ignore them. And you're just going to go around and around and around. The next round you'll see where the provisional cast on is, but it won't affect you because you've got the working yarn stitches on your needle, and you will just work again through those. You will knit your whole body all the way down to the end as you like it. You can add shaping. I'm going to talk about this some more next time too. And then for the sleeves, once you've finished the body, bind off, break your yarn, go back, and you'll pick up the sleeve stitches from the waste yarn that they're just held on. And then you will need to pick out the waste yarn from your provisionally cast on underarm stitches and add those stitches to your needle. So you'll have them all in a row. You'll want to put the stitch marker in the center of those underarm stitches so that it's the middle of the underarm. And that marker will help you keep track of your rounds and when it's time to decrease as you go down your sleeve. You could of course just do straight and they would end up sort of belled, but in both the wreathed pattern and the heart wants, which is coming soon now, we do decrease and keep a slim arm because the body is a little oversized and I wanted to balance those two things out. So when it's time to slip those stitches back to the needle, it's really easy. You just pull out, you'll see the stitches and pull out the waist yarn, do it one at a time, slip that stitch to your working needle and then just loop it out for the next one. And you'll see that the waist yarn goes through each stitch twice. So that's a little bit surprising maybe if you haven't done any kind of provisional cast on like this before. But it does loop through twice, so just be gentle, pull the thread out from the short end of the waist yarn and you will expose that stitch, pop it on your needle and do it again until and when you get halfway, you could put the stitch marker or you could go back and do it later. And you will then probably need to shift your stitches around on the needle so that you end up with, you're gonna join in the working yarn at that marker at the center of the underarm. You could also pick out the stitches from both ends of the underarm. So you could do half with one side of the needle and half with the other side of the needle, or if you're using DPNs, you could use different needles, whatever, but that way you are starting in the center. It's really sort of the easiest, most straightforward way to go. And really that's all it takes to do the split. It's pretty great. And as I said, doing it this way, top down, provisional underarms, you don't have to do any Kitchener stitch. When you're doing bottom up, I really don't think there's a way to do it. I'd like to figure that out. Like there's a way to join those stitches for the sleeve and the underarm as they come together here. But I haven't figured it out, so I do Kitchener stitch. I don't mind it, but I know some people do, and some people just really like top down. I tend to prefer bottom up, to be frank, but for color work, depending on what you're doing, which direction you want things to be, I haven't had a problem doing top down colorwork sweaters. My other complaint is then doing each sleeve when you've got the body already done and you've got all this fabric sort of flopping around. But those are my only objections. They're not big. And with the sleeve thing, I actually like working bottom up. I like to be able to just do one sleeve first as an extra gauge swatch, make sure things are really going the way I expect they're going. And I haven't figured out, I know that I could then Kitchener that sleeve all the way around, so I could work top down, do the body in the other sleeve, and Kitchener this one sleeve that was my gauge swatch, but I haven't tried that yet. I have plenty of other things to work on, so maybe I'll get to that at some point just to see how it goes. There are also some stitch patterns, generally not color work so much, but some stitch patterns where they really are facing one way or the other and it makes a difference. And so that would be another reason to think about the direction of your knitting. But otherwise, remember that knitting, there's no one right answer generally. There are lots of different ways to do things. I've just shown you quite a few and talked about other ways you can do it. So if you discover that you really just don't like top-down knitting, you could do the body and the sleeves, join things together, like standard join them together, and then do the yoke and finish off with some Kitchener and some weaving and events. If you really like top down, start at the top, you work your way down. You can even do that provisional underarm thing and keep going. You are the boss. Especially for round yokes and raglans, top down, bottom up, you can, if you find a pattern that you love, but you don't love the direction it's worked in, you can flip it and work it the other way around. I promise. It's not that hard. It's good for your brain to figure those things out, and it's good for you to be happy knitting the way you like to knit. So bear that in mind the next time you see a pattern that is top down when you're a bottom up gal, or bottom up when you're a top down guy. Like, just know that especially for raglans and round yokes, it's actually pretty easy to make those changes. So you decrease up if you're going up, you'd increase if you're going down. That will give it a little different look. You may even like that. You may want to do some open work, do your increases as yarn overs or something. And the same thing with a raglan. You would decrease at those 4 points or increase at those 4 points. So it will look a tiny bit different, but if you like the way you're doing it, that's really a priority. So bear that in mind as you are working. And I think that's it for today. It's pretty straightforward. It's a great, the provisional cast on stuff is a great technique for seamless knitting, which I love. And next time I'll be talking a little bit more about some customizations you can do with your knitting now that we are just talking body and sleeves. So, and maybe I'll touch a little bit more on things you can do for bottom up, top down. There are other yoke styles, and I can talk a little bit about that. It gets a little more complicated as the construction gets a little different, but it's actually not that different. You just have to like pause and think it through and you'll be fine. So that's it for me today. As always, if you have any questions, if you are watching on YouTube, be sure to leave a question below. If you're listening on iTunes and have a question, it's best to go to my website, KathleenDames.com, and you can leave a comment on the episode post on my blog. I'm also on Instagram and Twitter. Those are the places I tend to hang out these days. And of course, there is my Ravelry group on Ravelry. It's the Kathleen Dames Knitwear Design Group. So if you need to find links to that, you should be subscribed to my newsletter, or you can find it in the show notes. If you're enjoying this, please rate and review on iTunes. Even if you watch it or listen to it somewhere else, iTunes is the place to go for that kind of information. So that's the place that really, it helps me if you are enjoying this to let people know. So thank you so much for being here. I apologize for the delay in this episode, and I plan to get the next episode done in a timely manner if the construction people on my building will cooperate. So thanks so much for being here, and happy knitting. Mwah! Bye. This is season 4 of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames, and we are knitting the wreathed pullover together. Many thanks to B. Chez Bouche, Swans Island, and Monostil Uruguay for making such delicious yarns, and Brooklyn General, Knitty City, and Swans Island Company for selling those yarns to me. Many thanks to my technical editor, my test knitter, and to you for being part of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. To purchase the enwreathed pullover and or cowl pattern, visit KathleenDames.com/thesweater or find it on Ravelry. Remember that you get a copy of the cowl pattern if you purchase the pullover. While you're there, be sure to sign up for my newsletter so you won't miss an episode. Plus, you can always hit reply on our newsletter and ask me any questions that come up about sweater knitting. Posting your progress on social media? Be sure to use the hashtags enwreathed pullover and enwreathed cowl and tag me at Kathleen Dames. If you have a chance, be sure to rate and review on iTunes, even if you watch the YouTube version of this podcast. Thanks so much for being here, and happy knitting.